I sat quietly at my brother's engagement dinner, watching my family celebrate yet another milestone that somehow managed to exclude me. The candlelight flickered across their animated faces as they toasted David's success, his perfect life, his perfect fiancée. Then Sarah, his bride-to-be, turned to me with curious eyes and whispered something that made the entire room freeze. "Hi everyone, I'm Maya. If you've ever felt like an outsider in your own family, please subscribe to this channel. I promise you, by the end of this story, you'll understand that sometimes silence is the greatest strength of all." But let me take you back to where it all began. Growing up as the second child in the Mitchell family, I learned early that love came with conditions. When I was 8 years old, I had my first piano recital. I'd practiced for months, my small fingers stumbling over Mozart until they found their rhythm. The day of the performance, I pressed my face against the school window, searching for my parents' car in the parking lot. They never came. David had a basketball game that night, and according to Mom, family supports family. I played that piano piece to a room full of other people's parents. My own empty seat staring back at me like accusations. When I got home, Dad ruffled my hair absently and asked how David's game went. I told him about my recital, how I didn't mess up the difficult passage in the second movement. He nodded and turned back to the sports highlights on TV. That became the pattern. David's soccer tournaments took precedence over my debate competitions. His college prep courses were essential, while my art classes were nice hobbies. When I turned 12, my birthday dinner was cancelled because David had gotten suspended for cheating on a test. "The family needs to present a united front," Mom explained, as if my birthday was somehow separate from family unity. The message was clear. David was the priority, the investment, the future. I was the afterthought. By 16, I had learned to expect disappointment. When college applications came around, I had quietly researched scholarships and financial aid, knowing my parents' college fund was reserved for David's engineering degree. When I mentioned wanting to apply to Stanford for computer science, Dad actually laughed. "Sweetheart, girls don't need to aim that high. Find something practical, maybe teaching or nursing. Leave the tech stuff to your brother." But I had one moment, one shining moment, where I thought things might change. Senior year, I was named valedictorian. For weeks leading up to graduation, I imagined my parents' faces when they called my name. I pictured Dad finally understanding that I was smart, capable, worthy of investment. I wrote a speech about dreams and determination, about proving that success comes in many forms. The night before graduation, as I practiced my speech one final time, Mom sat me down at the kitchen table. "Maya, we're so proud of you for doing well in high school. But now you can focus on your real future, something stable and realistic. Maybe community college for 2 years, then transfer somewhere local. David's going to need support while he's at MIT." The words hit me like a physical blow. Even my greatest academic achievement was somehow about David's needs. That night, lying in my childhood bed surrounded by honor roll certificates and academic awards that no one had ever hung on the refrigerator, I made a decision that would change everything. 3 months after graduation, I left home with $500 in savings. A laptop I'd bought with money from my part-time job at the local coffee shop. And a business idea that had been brewing in my mind for 2 years. I didn't leave a note. I didn't announce my departure. I simply packed my essentials while everyone was at David's going away party for MIT and started the life they never believed I could have. 10 years later, at 28, I had built something they couldn't ignore, though they certainly tried. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd become everything they claimed to value: successful, independent, financially stable. Yet somehow, in their eyes, I remained the disappointment. The family dynamics hadn't changed, even as I'd grown into someone unrecognizable from the uncertain 18-year-old who'd left home. David, now 30, was still the golden child. He'd graduated from MIT, landed a prestigious engineering job at an aerospace company, and was dating Sarah, a brilliant woman who worked as head of innovation at a major tech firm. Mum introduced him at family gatherings as our successful son, while I remained Maya, who's still finding her direction. The exclusions continued in new, more sophisticated ways. Family Christmas became a performance where David's achievements were spotlighted while I was assigned kitchen duty. Maya's always been so helpful with the cooking, Mum would say, as if domestic labour was my highest calling. When my cousin got married last spring, I watched from the overflow table as David sat with the immediate family, sharing stories and inside jokes I was never part of. The worst part wasn't the obvious slights, it was the subtle erasure. At family photos, I was positioned at the edge, easy to crop out. When Mom updated her Facebook with family news, my accomplishments were mentioned in passing, while David's promotion got a full post with celebration emojis. When relatives asked about her children, she would beam about David's career trajectory and mention me as an afterthought. And Maya's doing her own thing too. But nothing prepared me for the engagement announcement. I found out about David's proposal the same way I learned about most family news, through a text message sent after everyone else had been called personally. David proposed, dinner tomorrow at 7, wear something nice. No excitement, no details, no invitation to share in the joy. Just the expectation that I would show up and play my assigned role as the supporting character in their family narrative. The engagement dinner was held at Chez Laurent, an upscale French restaurant that required reservations weeks in advance. I arrived exactly on time, wearing a black blazer and dress that I'd carefully chosen to be appropriate but not attention-grabbing. The family was already seated at a large round table near the window. David and Sarah, glowing with happiness, while Mom and Dad flanked them like proud sentries. I was directed to a seat at the far end of the table, between David's college roommate and Sarah's younger sister, both of whom I'd never met. As I settled into my chair, I caught the tail end of Dad's toast. We have one son who's exceeded every expectation we ever had, and another child who, well, is still working on finding her place in the world. The words stung, but I had armour built from years of similar comments. I smiled politely and raised my glass with everyone else, swallowing the humiliation along with the expensive wine. David didn't meet my eyes. He never did when Dad made comments like that. It was easier to pretend he didn't notice than to defend me. As the evening progressed, I found myself studying Sarah. She was everything a family like mine would approve of. Accomplished, articulate, beautiful in that effortless way that suggested good breeding and better genetics. She spoke passionately about her work in tech innovation, her eyes lighting up when she described problem solving and strategic thinking. She was, I realised, everything I might have been if I'd been given the same support and encouragement David received. But there was something else about Sarah, something that set her apart from the usual parade of David's girlfriends. She asked thoughtful questions and actually listened to the answers. When Dad launched into his favourite story about David's high school science fair victory, a story I'd heard approximately 50 times, she politely listened, but then asked about other family achievements. What about Maya? What was she into in high school? The question hung in the air for a moment too long. Mum recovered first. Oh, Maya was very creative, always had her head in the clouds. I was valedictorian, I said quietly, more to my wine glass than to the table. I gave the graduation speech. Sarah's eyebrows raised slightly. That's impressive. What did you study in college? Another pause. This time Dad jumped in. Maya took a different path. Very independent, our Maya. Didn't want the traditional college experience. It wasn't entirely a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. The truth was messier, full of rejected applications for scholarships I couldn't navigate alone, and a family that had written me off before I'd even tried. But I had learned long ago that correcting these gentle revisions of history only made family gatherings more uncomfortable for everyone. As dinner continued, I noticed Sarah watching me with increasing interest. Unlike the rest of my family, she seemed to actually see me. Not as the disappointing daughter or the work-in-progress sister, but as a person with my own story. When I mentioned living in San Francisco, she asked about the tech scene there. When I spoke knowledgeably about artificial intelligence trends, her attention sharpened. What kind of work do you do? She asked directly, cutting through Dad's attempt to change the subject, back to David's latest project. I work in technology, I said carefully. It was true, if incomplete. That's exciting. Which company? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a call I'd been expecting. I glanced at the screen and saw my attorney's name. This was the call I'd been waiting for all week. The one that would change everything. I excused myself and stepped outside to take it. Maya, it's done, Richard's voice was triumphant through the phone. Microsoft just confirmed. The acquisition goes public tomorrow morning. 150 million. Exactly as we discussed. Congratulations, you're about to become a very wealthy woman. I closed my eyes and let the magnitude of the moment wash over me. 8 years of 18-hour days, of bootstrap funding and rejected investor meetings, of building something from nothing while my family celebrated David's steady climb up someone else's corporate ladder. Tomorrow, the world would know what I had built. Tomorrow, the silence would finally be broken. When I returned to the table, Sarah was watching me with curious eyes. She had noticed something, perhaps the confidence in my posture, or the way I had handled the call with calm professionalism rather than the flustered energy of someone dealing with personal drama. Important call? She asked casually. Business, I replied, settling back into my seat. Nothing that can't wait until tomorrow. But something had shifted in the air between us. Sarah was looking at me differently now, as if she was reassessing everything she thought she knew about the Mitchell family dynamics. I could almost see the wheels turning in her head as she processed the discrepancies between how my family described me and what she was observing. The evening wound down with the usual family rituals, plans for the wedding being discussed over dessert, Mom showing photos of potential venues on her phone, Dad offering unsolicited advice about guest lists and catering budgets. I participated minimally, responding when directly addressed, but mostly observing the familiar choreography of a family that had learned to function around my absence rather than include my presence. As we prepared to leave, Sarah surprised me by asking for my phone number. "I'd love to continue our conversation about the tech industry," she said. "It's not often I meet someone who really understands the innovation space." David looked puzzled by his fiancée's interest in his disappointment of a sister, but he was too polite to comment. Mum and Dad exchanged glances that suggested they thought Sarah was being unnecessarily kind to their problematic daughter. I gave Sarah my number, wondering what she would think when she inevitably Googled me tomorrow. Wondering if she would put together the pieces that my own family had been too proud or too blind to see. That night, driving home to my empty apartment, I thought about the little girl who had played piano to an audience of strangers, who had given a valedictorian speech to parents who couldn't see past their own expectations. I thought about the years of being invisible, of being edited out of family stories, of being loved conditionally and found wanting. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, the acquisition would be announced and my name would be in Forbes and TechCrunch and every business publication that mattered. Tomorrow, the family that had spent 10 years explaining away my absence would have to confront the reality of what I had become while they weren't paying attention. But tonight, I was still just Maya, the sister who didn't fit, the daughter who couldn't be fixed, the woman who had learned to find her own way because no one else believed she was worth the investment. Tonight, I sat with that familiar solitude and prepared for a conversation I had been practicing in my head for a decade. Tomorrow, Sarah would learn who I really was. And through her eyes, maybe my family would finally see me too. The call with my attorney had ended 20 minutes ago, but the energy was still coursing through my veins as I returned to the table. Tomorrow morning, the business world would know that Technova Solutions, the AI automation company I'd built from my studio apartment 8 years ago, had been acquired by Microsoft for $150 million. Tonight, I was still just the disappointing daughter sitting at the far end of the family dinner table. Dad was in the middle of his favourite story about David's promotion to senior engineering manager, complete with dramatic gestures and unnecessary technical details that he didn't fully understand. Mum nodded along enthusiastically, her face glowing with maternal pride. David himself looked slightly embarrassed by the attention, but basked in it nonetheless. The aerospace industry is lucky to have someone with David's innovative thinking, Dad concluded, raising his wine glass. He's always been ahead of the curve, even as a kid. Sarah smiled politely, but I noticed her attention kept drifting to me. She had been watching me carefully since I'd returned from my phone call, as if she was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. There was something different about her observation now. More focused, more analytical, like she was seeing something that didn't match the narrative being presented. "Maya?" she said suddenly, interrupting Dad's transition into another David achievement story. You mentioned you work in tech. I'm curious about your perspective on the current AI market. There's been so much consolidation lately. The question caught me off guard, not because I couldn't answer it, but because someone at this table was actually asking for my professional opinion. It's an interesting time, I said carefully. A lot of smaller companies with innovative solutions are being acquired by major players who want to integrate AI capabilities. Any recent acquisitions that stand out to you? Sarah pressed, her eyes never leaving my face. I felt a flutter of something. Anticipation, maybe, or the thrill of walking along the edge of a cliff. There are a few deals in the pipeline that could reshape the industry, I said. Some might be announced as early as tomorrow. Sarah's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it, and her expression shifted subtly. I watched as she read whatever notification had appeared, her eyes widening slightly, before she looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "I just need to check something." She picked up her phone and began typing rapidly. David looked confused by his fiancée's sudden distraction, while Mom and Dad seemed irritated that their audience was no longer paying attention to their David-centric storytelling. "Is everything all right, sweetheart?" David asked, reaching for Sarah's hand. "Yes, And Sarah's fingers were flying across her phone screen, and I could see the glow of Google search results reflecting in her eyes. "I'm sorry, this is going to sound strange, but Maya, aren't you the founder of Technova Solutions?" The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. The entire table went silent, not the comfortable silence of people enjoying a meal, but the charged quiet that precedes something irreversible. "I'm sorry," Mom said, her voice tight with confusion and a hint of annoyance at being interrupted. Sarah turned her phone screen toward the table, showing a Forbes article from 6 months ago titled 30 Under 30, Tech Innovators Reshaping AI. There, in high resolution, was my professional headshot above a paragraph describing my company's revolutionary approach to automated customer service integration. "Maya Mitchell, founder and CEO of Technova Solutions," Sarah read aloud, her voice growing stronger with each word. "The San Francisco-based startup that's been quietly disrupting the AI automation space for the past 8 years. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched my family's faces cycle through confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been recognition if they had been paying attention for the last decade. David was the first to speak. That can't be right. Maya works in tech, but she's not a CEO. Sarah's fingers were moving again, pulling up more articles. Technova Solutions just closed a major acquisition deal. She continued reading from her phone. Microsoft announced this evening that they're acquiring the AI company for... She paused, her eyes meeting mine across the table. $150 million. Dad's wineglass stopped halfway to his mouth. Mum's hand flew to her chest as if Sarah had announced someone's death. David just stared at me like I was a stranger who had wandered into his engagement dinner by mistake. "Maya?" Mum's voice was barely a whisper. "Is this true?" I took a slow sip of my wine, buying myself a moment to choose my words carefully. For 8 years, I had imagined this moment. I had rehearsed different versions of this conversation in my head, some dramatic, some vindictive, some quietly triumphant. Now that it was happening, I found myself feeling strangely calm. "Yes," I said simply. "It's true." "But," Dad sputtered, his face flushing red, "you never said, 'We thought you were still figuring things out.'" "I was never asked to figure anything out for you," I replied, keeping my voice level. "I figured it out for myself." Sarah was still scrolling through articles on her phone, her expression a mixture of amazement and something that looked like anger on my behalf. "Maya, this is incredible. Your company's technology is being integrated into Microsoft's entire cloud infrastructure. This is huge. How long?" David's voice was strained. This was, "How long have you been running a company?" 8 years, I said, "since I was 20. 8 years, Mum's voice cracked. "Maya, why didn't you tell us?" The question was so absurd, so completely disconnected from reality, that I almost laughed. When would I have told you? During the family dinners I wasn't invited to, in the Christmas cards where my accomplishments got one line while David's got paragraphs? Or maybe during the phone calls you never made to ask how I was doing? "That's not fair," Dad protested. "We always cared about your success." "No," I said firmly, feeling years of suppressed frustration rising to the surface. "You cared about David's success. You tolerated my existence." Sarah was looking between my family members with growing understanding. I could see her putting together years of subtle slights and casual dismissals, recognizing the pattern of exclusion that had been invisible to her during one dinner but was now glaringly obvious. "Wait," David said, his engineering mind apparently catching up to the implications. "If you've been running a successful company for 8 years, then when Dad said you were still finding your direction..." "I was directing a team of 45 employees," I finished for him. "I was managing relationships with Fortune 500 clients. I was filing patents and speaking at industry conferences and building something that Microsoft thought was worth 9 figures. The weight of their collective realization was almost physical. I watched them struggle to reconcile the narrative they had constructed about me with the reality that was crashing down around them." "Maya, sweetheart," Mum started, her voice taking on the artificially bright tone she used when she was trying to fix something she'd broken. "This is wonderful news. Why don't we order champagne? We should celebrate." "Celebrate what?" I asked quietly. "My success? Or the fact that you finally found out about it?" "Don't be like that," Dad said, his tone shifting into the authoritative voice he used when he wanted to end an uncomfortable conversation. "We're family. We're proud of you." "You're proud of me now," I corrected. 20 minutes ago, you introduced me as the child who was still working on finding her place in the world." Sarah had gone quiet, but I could feel her watching this family dynamic unfold with the sharp attention of someone who was seeing it clearly for the first time. When she spoke, her voice was measured and thoughtful. "Maya, I owe you an apology," she said. "Before dinner tonight, David and your parents told me that you were still figuring yourself out and that you'd always been the creative one who marched to her own drummer. They made it sound like you were struggling." "We never said she was struggling," Mum protested weakly. "You said she took a different path because she didn't want the traditional college experience," Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength. "You said she was very independent, like it was a character flaw. You talked about her like she was a family project that hadn't worked out yet." The accuracy of Sarah's observation cut through the air like a blade. Even David had the grace to look uncomfortable as his fiancée laid out exactly how they had presented me to her. "That's not how we meant it," David said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it?" I asked. "David, when was the last time you asked me about my work? When was the last time any of you showed interest in my life beyond whether I was dating someone or when I might settle down?" The question hung in the air unanswered because we all knew the answer was never. "Maya," Dad tried again, his voice softer now, "we had no idea you were doing so well. If you had known what?" I interrupted. "You would have been proud of me? You would have included me in family celebrations? You would have mentioned my accomplishments when people asked about your children?" "Of course we would have," Mum said quickly. "But you didn't know because you never asked," I said. "For 8 years, none of you asked what I was building or what I was working toward. You just assumed I was failing because that fit better with the story you wanted to tell about David's success." Sarah's phone buzzed again, and she glanced at it before looking back at me with something approaching awe. "Maya, you're trending on LinkedIn. The Microsoft acquisition is being called one of the biggest AI deals of the year." I nodded, unsurprised. Richard had warned me that the announcement would generate significant media attention. Technova's technology was being integrated into several of Microsoft's core products, and the industry had been speculating about potential acquisitions for months. "This changes everything," David said quietly, as if he was still processing the magnitude of what he'd learned. "No," I said firmly, "this doesn't change anything. This just makes visible what was always true, that I was capable of more than you believed I was." "Maya, please." Mum's voice was pleading now. "Don't let this create distance between us. We're family." I looked around the table at these people who shared my DNA but had never really known me. Dad, who had laughed at my college ambitions. Mum, who had assigned me kitchen duty while celebrating David's achievements. David, who had never once asked about my dreams or goals or the company I was building while he climbed someone else's corporate ladder. "We've been distant for years," I said gently. "You just didn't notice because you weren't looking." "That's not true," Dad protested. "We love you." "I know you love me," I said, "but you love the version of me that doesn't challenge your assumptions. You love the Maya who stays quiet at family dinners and doesn't overshadow David's accomplishments. You love the daughter who fits into the story you want to tell about your family." Sarah had been quiet during this exchange, but now she spoke up. "Maya, I have to ask. When I mentioned that my company had been trying to partner with Technova and that we couldn't get a meeting with the decision makers, was that because of you?" I smiled for the first time that evening. "Your company's proposal was, interesting, but your market approach was too aggressive for our client base. I sent feedback through my business development team 6 months ago." "You turned down my company," Sarah said, and there was something like admiration in her voice. "You've been sitting here all night listening to us talk about David's career and your parents' business advice, and you turned down my multi-million-dollar tech company." "It wasn't personal," I said. It was just business." The irony wasn't lost on anyone at the table. Sarah, the accomplished innovation executive who my family had been trying to impress all evening, had been seeking a partnership with the sister they had dismissed as directionless. Maya, David said, his voice small, I don't understand why you never told us. I studied my brother's face, searching for the boy who had once shared a bedroom with me, who had taught me to ride a bike and helped me with math homework before the family dynamics shifted and made us competitors instead of allies. When I was 18 and left home, I sent you an email about my business idea, I said quietly. Do you remember what you wrote back? David's face paled. He remembered. You said it was cute that I was dreaming big, but that I should focus on getting a real job and maybe taking some business classes at community college, I continued. You said entrepreneurship was risky and that not everyone was cut out for it. I was trying to protect you, David said weakly. No, I said. You were protecting the narrative that you were the successful one and I was the one who needed guidance. Even my dreams were a threat to your position in this family. The conversation was interrupted by my phone ringing. I glanced at the screen and saw it was Rebecca, my head of communications. The acquisition announcement was probably generating interview requests and media attention that needed my immediate attention. I need to take this, I said, standing up from the table. It's work. As I stepped away to answer the call, I could hear my family's muffled conversation behind me. Rebecca's voice was excited as she rattled off a list of interview requests from major business publications and news networks. CNN wanted a live interview tomorrow morning. The Wall Street Journal was doing a feature story on women entrepreneurs in AI. Forbes wanted to do a follow-up piece on my inclusion in their 30 under 30 list. When I returned to the table, the energy had shifted again. My family was huddled together in intense discussion, while Sarah sat slightly apart, scrolling through what appeared to be news articles about the acquisition. Maya, Mum said as I sat down, her voice artificially bright again. We were just talking about how we should plan a proper celebration. Maybe a family dinner this weekend? We could invite the extended family, let everyone know about your success. The suggestion was so tone-deaf, so completely misaligned with the reality of our relationship that I had to take a moment to compose my response. Mum, I said gently, I appreciate the thought, but I don't need a celebration from people who weren't here for the journey. But we want to be here for you now, Dad insisted. We want to support you. Where was that support when I was maxing out credit cards to keep my servers running? I asked. Where was it when I was working 100-hour weeks to land my first major client? Where was it when I was giving TED Talks and winning industry awards that you never acknowledged? We didn't know, Mum said, tears forming in her eyes. Because you didn't ask, I replied. For 8 years, you didn't ask. Sarah cleared her throat softly. Maya, if I may, I think what your family is trying to say is that they want a chance to rebuild your relationship. They're realizing they've made mistakes. I looked at Sarah with gratitude for her attempt at mediation, but also with the sadness that comes from recognizing good intentions that arrive too late. I don't need them to rebuild anything, I said, or I've built my own life with people who believed in me from the beginning. I've found my own family among my team, my mentors, my friends, who celebrated my victories and supported me through my failures. Maya, please, David said, and there was genuine emotion in his voice now. I know we messed up. I know we didn't see what we should have seen, but you're my sister, your family. I looked at my brother, really looked at him, and saw something I hadn't expected. Genuine remorse. Not just embarrassment at being caught in their assumptions, but actual regret for the years of overlooking me. David, I said softly, I forgave this family a long time ago. Not because you asked for forgiveness, but because carrying anger was holding me back from building something better. Then why can't we start over? He asked. Because starting over requires trust, I said. And trust requires consistency. You've had 30 years to see me as someone worth believing in. Tonight you learned I was successful, and suddenly I became worth your attention. What happens when the media attention dies down? What happens when I'm not trending on LinkedIn anymore? Do I go back to being the sister who disappointed you? The question hung in the air because none of them could honestly answer it. They wanted to believe they would change, but we all knew that deeply ingrained patterns don't shift overnight just because new information becomes available. Maya, Sarah said quietly, for what it's worth, I think you're remarkable. Not because of your success, but because of how you've handled this entire conversation. You could have been cruel tonight. You could have humiliated them. Instead, you've been honest and direct and kind. I smiled at her. This woman who had stumbled into our family dysfunction and somehow managed to see it clearly in a single evening. Thank you, I said. That means a lot, especially coming from someone whose respect I genuinely admire. The evening was winding down now, the energy deflated by the weight of revelations and uncomfortable truths. Other diners had begun to leave, and the restaurant staff was clearing tables around us with the efficient politeness of people who wanted to close. I should go, I said, reaching for my purse. I have early interviews tomorrow morning. Maya, wait, Mom called as I stood up. Please don't leave like this. Can we talk soon? Just the family? I looked at my parents, these people who had shaped me in ways both positive and destructive, who had loved me imperfectly and hurt me unintentionally, who were now grappling with the reality that their narrative about me had been fundamentally wrong at all. I'm not angry with you, I said truthfully. I'm not trying to punish you, but I also can't pretend that learning about my success erases 8 years of being overlooked. If you want to be part of my life going forward, it can't be because you finally decided I was worth your attention. It has to be because you genuinely want to know who I am, not who you thought I was. I kissed each of them goodbye, a ritual of affection that felt both familiar and strange. After everything that had been revealed. When I got to Sarah, she stood up and hugged me tightly. I'm sorry, she whispered in my ear. I'm sorry for how they talked about you before tonight. It's not your fault, I whispered back. Take care of David. Despite everything, he's a good man who just got lost in family expectations. As I walked out of the restaurant and into the cool San Francisco night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years when leaving a family gathering. Peace. Not the peace of resolution, but the peace of clarity. I had spent 8 years building something extraordinary while they weren't paying attention. Tomorrow the world would know what I had accomplished. Tonight, I finally knew that their approval, the thing I had craved for 30 years, was no longer necessary for my happiness. My phone buzzed with another call from Rebecca. The story was already spreading across social media, and there were interview requests coming in from around the globe. I had work to do, a company to represent, a team to support through this major transition. I had a life to live, built by my own hands, and filled with people who had believed in me when I was nobody special except to myself. And that, I realized as I drove home through the city lights, was more than enough. Have you ever felt like you didn't belong in your own family? Comment below, and remember, your worth isn't defined by people who can't see your value. Subscribe to follow more stories about finding your own strength. Sometimes people only recognize your worth when they hear it from someone else, but you've known your worth all along.